The Strokes were one of those bands that created a new movement in rock music in the early 2000s. The release of their debut album fueled what was becoming the garage rock revival movement in the US, alongside albums from the White Stripes, Interpol, and Yeah Yeah Yeahs. Their simplistic yet evocative sound made skinny jeans and guitars popular again, and they managed to keep their sound both congruent and fresh from one album to another as the years have gone by. Let's take a closer look at one of the most important rock bands of the 2000s. Singer-songwriter Julian Casablancas, guitarist Nick Valenci, and drummer Fab Morati started playing together after meeting at the White School in Manhattan, New York. Bassist Nikolai Fraiture later befriended Julian while the two were attending a private bilingual school in New York. And even further down the line, Julian later went to Switzerland to a boarding school there as well, and while studying there, he met guitarist Albert Hammond Jr., who joined him back to New York to study and ended up sharing an apartment with him. From there on, the five guys decided to start a band together. They played at different gigs around New York, for example, The Spiral, Luna Lounge, and eventually Mercury Lounge. After rehearsing a bunch of songs, many of which would eventually end up on their debut album, they decided to record an EP, The Modern Age, which was released in 2001 through British record labels Beggar's Banquet and Rough Trade.
Last night, she said, "Oh, baby, I feel so down."
The EP started a massive bidding war amongst record labels who wanted a piece of the band. They eventually landed on a contract, though, with RCA.
Just in time, stayed for a while.
The Modern Age. I think that was the first song where Julian and Nick and Albert and Nikolai all kind of looked back at me and said, if you're gonna be a drummer, you might as well hit hard. And I was just like tapping away, tap, 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 tap. And I learned how to try to hit hard, at least, if anything.
Their debut album was soon recorded after the release of their EP, and has ever since that time been regarded as one of the best debut albums of all time. Julian's lyrics are notable for being quite simplistic, and for the most part paint different pictures of what it's like to be young in New York and falling in love. Their sound also captured something simplistic. Most of the songs were fleshed out through live takes in the studio, and on the record you can hear these metronomic drum lines, upbeat and sometimes conflicted melodies that meld together with Julian's effortlessly clean vocals that sometimes break into strident half screams.
I said, please don't slow me down if I'm going too fast.
People really needed Is This It? The record became number 71 on the UK album charts in 2001 and reached 33 on Billboard Top 200 in the US the next year. But despite of not reaching the top 10s, the album gradually picked up popularity as time went on and was certified with platinum sales in Canada, UK, and Australia. But again, why did this album all of a sudden pick up speed in terms of sales? Why did it become such a phenomenon? Well, let's put it into context. So, it was the early 2000s. Grunge was getting old, Britpop was thrown out of the window, and nu metal, well, a lot of people hated that genre to begin with. The Strokes' take on garage rock and post-punk revival blew life into rock culture again. Popular opinion moved from DJs and pop music to skinny jeans and guitars. Whatever the Strokes were doing, it definitely caused change in the music culture. It became acceptable for record labels to scout for new wavers in rock music, like the Libertines, Arctic Monkeys, and Kings of Leon. Now, the Strokes started recording their second album in 2002 with producer Nigel Godrich, who's probably best known for working with Radiohead. But they eventually decided to scrap what they did with Godrich and went back to working with Jordan Raphael, whom had produced their debut album. And talking about their debut album, when they recorded Is This It?, they were able to test their material in different venues for quite some time before they recorded the material. But with Room on Fire, their second record, they went straight from touring into the studio with a deadline to reach, which really restricted their creative output. Guitarist Nick Valenci mentioned that the album would have ended up a lot better if we'd had another couple of weeks. The album's creative process was quite a stretch for the band, and it didn't achieve the same commercial success as their debut, but it was still a solid effort. Their sound followed the same reference points as before, and the album was a definite move forward for the band in terms of their media reputation. First Impressions of Earth, their third album, was released in January of 2006. It was recorded over a 10-month period together with Jordan Raphael, initially stepping in as the producer. But since the band wanted David Kane to co-produce it, and Raphael found it hard to work with him, they ended up with just having Kane doing most of the producing. Now, I want to say that this album cemented the band's sound, while at the same time showing a few glimmers here and there of novelty and experimentation along the way. A great example of this is Ask Me Anything, which only features what seems to be samples of cellos and violas.
I've got nothing to say. I've got nothing to say.
About the song, Julian said, "It's funny, I dreamt it was a Scissor Sisters song, and there was just a chorus where they kept saying, 'I've got nothing to say,' and it was so hypnotic and weird and fucked with my head. I woke up thinking it was a real song, and then I realized, oh wait, I made that up in a dream, so I can just do it, and I'm not plagiarizing." After touring First Impressions, the band decided to take a break for some time. They didn't return back to writing new material again until 2009. And when they announced that they were back, they actually shared some of their creative process on social media, stating that they were making a mixture of 70s rock and music from the future. They also explained that they were much more collaborative in terms of songwriting. Now, everything was fine to begin with, as the band was always together in the entire first stage of creating material. But after going into studio sessions, they started facing some problems. Joe Ciccarelli was hired to produce the album, but feeling disappointed with his efforts because of his reserved production style, the band ended up scrapping all the material they'd created with him except for one song.
So we talk about ourselves.
The band was looking to create something more experimental, something similar to what they'd heard on other records from MGMT, Arctic Monkeys, and Crystal Castles. They then decided to go for Gus Oberg as their producer for the rest of the record. But although the production met their expectations, for some reason Julian became less engaged during their sessions. He showed up to fewer sessions, and when he was there, he wouldn't really say that much. Guitarist Nick Valenci noted, "I won't do the next album if we make it like this. No way, it was awful, just awful. Working in a fractured way, not having a singer there. I'd show up certain days and do guitar takes by myself, just me and the engineer." In terms of sound on this album, they still stayed true to their origins, but they did experiment with some meaty electronic samples, synths, and more guitar effects. Producer Gus Oberg would also record the digital guitar tracks onto tape and then re-recording them back to digital later on to achieve a more analog sound. But this wasn't all. They also notably changed their ways of recording Julian's vocals too. This was the first time they used backing vocals in their music, they included vocal harmonies, and experimented with different layering techniques. Now, the Strokes were back at it again with a fifth record a couple of years later. Calm Down Machine was released in March of 2013, and with this one, they fulfilled their record contract with RCA and marked this departure clearly through the artwork. It actually resembles one of RCA's old tape reel boxes. The band, strangely enough, decided to pull a media blackout before, during, and even after the release of this album. No interviews, photos, TV appearances, shows, or tours were made. Fans weren't able to see them playing live again until 2014 and 15, where they would eventually set up a limited amount of shows. Now last but not least, we have their EP Future, Present and Past that was released in 2016, featuring 3 new songs and a remix. The title is said to represent the 3 original songs on the EP. Drag Queen refers to the future, Oblivious is referring to the present, and Thread of Joy is the past. Now I want to mention at the end here that Julian Casablancas needs to be tackled in another video because he's been branching out during the last few years. He's done so many awkward interviews, started a solo career, he's collaborated with a ton of artists, and even started another band called The Voids. So let me know guys if you want me to make a video specifically about Julian Casablancas, okay? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching guys. I just want to give an extra shout out to these people over at Patreon. These are actually the people that make it a lot easier for me to create these videos. So if you want to help me create even better videos and make rock music more meaningful for other people, then make sure you hit the first link in the description below, and I'll see you over at Patreon. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.